anti-government sentiment is permeating the presidential race, but it's been creeping into other arenas as well, most notably with the recent federal court order that Apple release phone data from one of the San Bernardino shooters. And judging by the coverage, it appears the media is backing Apple's refusal to comply. It's being billed as Apple versus the FBI.
It's a showdown between the FBI and Apple.
But really, it's a lawful court order telling Apple to figure out a way to break into the iPhone owned by one of the San Bernardino mass killers.
The reality is if you put a back door in, that back door's for everybody, for good guys and bad guys.
That's Apple CEO Tim Cook, claiming once you've broken in, it opens up the floodgates to all kinds of snoops, law enforcement, and hackers. It's a public relations war that Cook and Apple are winning.
The federal government versus Apple.
Well, when you put it that way, who wouldn't be pro-Apple? The nation's national security agencies have taken a beating in recent years, from overzealous law enforcement to prying and spying on Americans' telephone calls. So it's no wonder the press and the public, like these privacy advocate protesters, are wary of this simple court order. On the other hand,
we still have one of those killer's phones that we have not been able to open.
And that's hard to stomach. Yeah, this is a tough one. You know, it seems like Apple can do no wrong in the eyes of the American public and consequently the media. We're constantly promoting their products, getting nothing for it. You know, news programs, run out and cover every new gizmo that they, produce and get nothing from it, just more publicity for Apple. And it's a company, even though the CEO is an impervious billionaire, they back them.
No, that's right. And, the media has been very pro-Apple in this whole story. It's a complicated story, and basically they've taken Apple's technical explanation as the gospel. And what we're really coming down to here is that the government has a legitimate interest in being able to access this terrorist phone. The government doesn't care how the information is dug up. That's really kind of on Apple. Apple is certainly entitled to keep fighting this in the courts. Ultimately, we'll see what will happen. Terrific piece of journalism in the Daily Beast, by the way, today. It turns out that Apple has broken into 70 phones in the past. It's become more difficult technically, but the fact is they've done this before.
And the court, by the way, today is saying this is a repudiation. This has nothing, a repudiation of a court order. It has nothing to do with privacy versus national security. This is just, hey, you're refusing a court order.
I don't see it like that. And I'm not I have an iPhone, but I'm not I love Apple person. Because when you look at the details of it, the older phones, and if you're talking about Apple breaking into in the past, didn't have the same kind of encryption. What is being asked of the company now is to create something to allow the government to do it. To me, that's another step forward. That is not, you got the phone, we know you can break into it because you've done it before. That's not the same thing to me.
The government isn't asking them to create something. They're saying that's what they have to do.
Well, exactly. So they are asking. Well, but that's what it. That's what it comes down to. Dan and I are
skeptical that that's what they really have to do.
Listen, I'm
not buying it. I think they could get into that phone tomorrow if they wanted to.
Well, then here's the other part. Just let me say this: it is not clear there's anything on the phone. After all of that, then
we don't know.
I think that there are some technical questions here that I think are worth raising. The 70 phones that were, as you said, broken into by Apple were not broken into, and to use that term, anywhere near the way that this is being done. Essentially, what Apple is being asked to do is to create a new version of iOS, the system software, that will allow the government to go in and type in as many passcodes as they would like over and over again. Right now, if you go past 10, the phone will essentially self-destruct.
If it's set to self-destruct.
If it's set to self-destruct. This is really, I think there's actually an interesting, I saw someone say on Twitter, there's an interesting Third Amendment question here. The Third Amendment to the Constitution, which is not one we talk about a lot. Basically, the idea, can a company be required by a government to build something new? And I think that it's a very legitimate question. I think, the way that Apple CEO Tim Cook laid out the issues in his open letter, I think were very valid. And I think the important thing is this is an important conversation for our country to have. There is not an easy answer to should all of our electronic data be available to the government whenever the government wants it. It's a difficult question.
You said that we cover Apple releases all the time, or new product unveilings, and get nothing out of it. We actually do get
viewers out of it, we get clicks out of it. People eat that stuff up. I am not an iPhone owner. I have been in the
Really?
past. I went for a lower cost version, for a lower cost plan, because I wanted to save money. Haven't missed it at all, I have to say. I've seen a lot of skewed coverage in Apple's favor. When I dug into reporting on this, I didn't really see evidence of troubling pro-Apple bias. I saw people laying out the pros and cons of the government's case and of Apple's case in a very responsible way. This is complex stuff. I don't think it's cut and dried. And of course, the court is going to say, "Oh, well, they're simply challenging a lawful court order." They have the right to push back, and that's what they're doing.
Well, maybe it's because it's being simplified to Apple versus the FBI. It's not Apple
But that's
versus
what
the
it
FBI.
is. But it's Apple
not.
versus the federal
Yeah,
government.
yeah.
But it is a larger discussion between the government and, I mean, this goes back to Edward Snowden. This is,
Yes.
to what
Yeah.
degree should technology companies just hand over to the government our secrets? And there are legitimate arguments on both sides. I actually thought someone who had a really great statement about it last night was Marco Rubio. During the town
I saw
hall,
that.
Yes,
he
that was
said
interesting.
this is a complicated issue and didn't go for the easy hit on patriotism.
Actually, Ted
or-
Cruz did too, to his
Yeah.
credit.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because Rubio said, if we want to protect ourselves from the people outside of the house, this is his wording, then I'm concerned about the people inside the house as well in terms of privacy and security. And how do you balance that? And that's why I don't think the coverage has been overly Apple, because people who are genuinely in the middle, who have a stake in this, are saying, gee, people on the committee and in Congress who have to make a decision about this are saying, well, I don't know, So I think
the
this is.
language has
Well,
been
here's
largely
here's
firm.
where I think the bias has been in favor of Apple. Everybody is reporting that the government wants Apple to do this, this, and this. The government couldn't care less what Apple does. The government just wants the information. It's Apple that's saying, we need to do this, this, and this.
Yeah, but if you
so then
can't
the
do it-
government comes
if-
back and says, well, okay, do that.
Yeah, but if you can't do it, I mean,
That's their problem.
no, it's not their problem. That then is a request
I
for
know,
them to
but-
do
Right, it needs
more
a new
than
thing needs to be built.
exactly.
Yeah.